Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. Being German, I'm afraid my presentation has less sex, more blood in it, so it's our tradition. Sorry about that. So what I'm going to start, you might know the saying, the first casualty of war is truth. And it's also among always the first institutions under attack in a battle. The media institutions, the first institutions were taken over. So why is this actually? What role has media in wartime? So what I try to do is briefly look at the development on propaganda research, on research of persuasive communication, to see what we are actually right now know about it, and to see what it means for media in war times. Which role do they have? So to get you in the mood, one citation. Can I have some? A new and subtle instrument must weld thousands and even millions of human beings into one amalgamated mass of hate and will and hope. A new flame must burn out the canker of dissent and temper the steel of bellicose enthusiasm. The name of this new hammer and anvil of social solidarity is propaganda. So I think that fits us in the frame. The citation is from one of the founders of the modern communication science, German NGO Friedrich-Ebert. It's from the late 20s, but actually referring to World War I. He was a liberal thinker and would hardly ever have used these words before war. So what changed? What happened? At the beginning of the century, and especially in World War I, it was the first time we understood that media is a powerful tool having an impact on numerous people and their perception of the world. So why at this time, actually? Next slide, please. First time we had an agglomeration of millions of people in a city, so the urbanization effect and the idea of a mass society came out. So society constructed out of atomized persons, lost their social context. We had a first war with millions of fighters, which need enormous resources. So there was the first time when it was necessary to launch actually a communicated effort to gain support from the people in the form of volunteers. War credits. As you see, if you kind of invest, so either you give money or you fight on your own. There was a massive effort needed to get people, to bring them to do or engage in a war, this American war propaganda, which was so off the territory. It's in Europe, it's far away, so why boast? So those participating in these communication efforts, a lot of sociologists, very good experts, understood quite quickly the effects of the media coverage, as media coverage actually didn't reflect the reality, it just showed a part of it. And by this changed the perception of people on what was going on in the war. Being aware of this effect, we had the first phase of communication research regarding propaganda. Next slide, please. So this first phase was based on understanding of people as this already mentioned irrational mass, a little bit lazy in thinking, atomized due to urbanization without social context, easily to be influenced, especially by such a powerful tool as media. So it was the idea of having very strong mass media effects. There was a high season of practitioners' literature, so those who were engaged sold their knowledge actually. And after war, the professionals went on from wartime propaganda and sold their kind of knowledge and techniques to business and politics, which triggered criticism of liberals because they saw in this threat of liberal thinking, of people informing or doing their thinking on their own. So there was already a kind of criticism of propaganda about a negative touch it didn't have before. In a reaction to this, practitioners in business and politics just rebranded the thing and called it public relations. Since then we have public relations actually. One of the propaganda activists, Bernays, renamed and rebranded it. And that's why actually propaganda is an awful term for research if you ever want to do it on it. It's not very clearly defined. It's hard to differentiate between propaganda, advertisement, and PR. So the second phase was in the 40s and 50s. Still there was the idea of this society under threat. The idea of a disintegrating society due to modernization, institutes which organized social cohesion like churches, families, local communities and so on became less important. So scientists tried to use media as a form to create this kind of common understanding, this kind of social cohesion to bind everyone together. So they looked for effective ways to do positive propaganda, when the positive propaganda term came up again. But there's a growing understanding of the communication, the growing research on communication, and understood that communication is a very difficult process and the message not always reaches the target or became understood quite differently. So the idea of mass theory was individualized people, atomized people, was taken away, and a new understanding of people as integrated in their social setting came up. With people who are preoccupied already by very strong beliefs and environmental conditioning, which hinders strong media effects. So we thought about weak media effects, but that people can still be manipulated if you just have the right tools. They looked and they tried to research how to have to construct communication this way. Nowadays, and it's from the 60s when we started, first the term propaganda completely got desecrated, not only because of World War I, but at least in the Western world. It's the difference you have to keep in mind. Propaganda in the Western world always indicates communication we seem legitimate, while in the post-Soviet space, due to traditions there, you have it in a neutral use or sometimes even a positive use, the word propaganda. So we understood that things are much more and more complex. We understood actually that people are not passively taking in media and getting a kind of work done. They are active, they are selective. They select media by the expectations, by their interests, by the expectation which benefits they might get from media usage. Secondly, media competence is growing as people see and consume more and more media. The accessible number of media is also growing, all factors which lessen the effect of persuasive communication. So there are very limited, so what we see right now, we have very limited short-term effects. But maybe, or more likely, strong effects on the long term on socialization of people. Just to give you a very brief example on research, one of my favorites, media and violence. So media and violence, or in games, doesn't work like this, that you watch Die Hard 1, 2, 3 and go on the street and want to kill someone. It doesn't directly work like this. The same with ego shooters. You can play 8 hours in a row and still go to bed quietly, not with the intention of killing anyone. But it might have a long-term effect on people, like giving some role models, which might be used by people who already have an inclination to aggressive behavior. So, but to claim this out or to have a kind of effect like school shootings or something, a lot of other effects have to come together. So you have a lot of influential variables on these effects. So why did I rush you through this history of communication research? Firstly, because you find assumptions, expectations, argumentations of all of these three phases still nowadays political debates. If you find someone who is keen on censorship of any kind, it's mostly the first phase, to protect people who are a little bit lazy in thinking. If you have the idea of, you need to construct through media a kind of a social cohesion, create a nation, whatever, you're kind of in the second phase. So, just want to show you, in case you need actually support of censorship, you can please point in there. Say, being the senior doesn't work like this. Secondly, I want to show that we start with huge expectations of media effects in wartime, and ended up by recent research with effects which are much more long-term focused, which are not that clear-cut, varying in degrees, are dependent on many other influences. So not quite impressive, actually. Especially why both at all, and why this screaming title I choose, like broadcast to kill. It's maybe also just persuasive communication, tricky in the room, which kind of work. I give you 2 examples. Next slide, please. Two examples. Rwanda, long-standing conflict between two ethnicities in the country between the beginning of April 1994 and the middle of July, died 800,000 to 1 million people. In nearly 100 days, the Hutu majority killed nearly 75% of the Tutsi minority. Newspaper and radio was preparing the killing quite actively. Yugoslavia, after decades with an ideology of a multi-ethnic state, a complete disintegration of the state and ethnically defined sub-states occurred. War on ethnic differentiation occurred. The war in Bosnia, so the state, the sub-state, which was most ethnically diverse, only caused 100,000 dead people. Ethnically motivated mass killings like the Srebrenica massacre. And media, news, and television was helping, preparing, splitting up the country into different minorities and getting people to kill actually other people who had been the neighbors. So in both cases, media was not the origin of violence, but it was extremely instrumental to prepare people on this and orchestrates the fights. So why does media have so much more effect in war times, as we can measure and we have in actual results right now? Next slide, please. First, the results we can prove, come mainly from Western societies with a plurality in media, plural political system, more or less, and are mainly in peace times or even war times, not with a war on their own territory, which is a difference. We hardly have any research on media effects in regions which experience a war out of obvious reasons. Second, information is much harder to get into proof with the government as a gatekeeper, which is easier to control the information flow. Information is much more needed as it has a direct importance for people, and that's why people watch media with a different approach. It changes from entertainment to information. So when we, let's say, inform ourselves about the war in Syria, it is by and large entertainment, because we don't have a direct usage of this information. But people who are in war need this information to know what next. So they're perceiving it and then working with the information differently. And lastly, people partly accept to be manipulated. They perfectly understand it's a one-sided information they get. But they want a simple answer to a very complicated situation. They need orientation in a world which completely is in ruins. So if people are thinking about whether they have to flee or people they love get shot, they don't want a big explanation about geopolitics, about economics, or whatever. They want a very simple answer that fits it into the screen. And the simplest answer you can get is actually it's them. You don't need more. Next slide. So what's the role of media in war? First, of course, information and explanation. One major thing is, and it's actually a proved effect, is the gender setting. Bernard Cohen told us, one of the communication studies scientists, that media may not be successful in telling people what to think, but they're stunningly successful in telling people what to think about. So first step is to bring war on the agenda. If you want to prepare someone, you have to get it on the agenda. If media is covering all the time terrorism, people will put, if you ask them, what are their concerns about terrorism, quite high. If they're talking about unemployment, they put unemployment quite high. This is a kind of mechanism that works because we only have the media to kind of observe the brighter reality. Second, you have to legitimate the war. At least in modern societies, you have to gain the support. So there's the idea of the just war. Modern states have to explain why they want to engage. More precisely, they have to prove that the decision to go to war is legitimate. So there's a just cause. That's correct and just intentions you have, that all means already used and so on. You have to prove the way war is done is just. The warfare is accurate, it's okay. Think about the discussion on drone strikes. That's exactly what is meant with that. And so you have to explain what the numbers of dead soldiers are justified for the aim actually we want to have. Next slide. The most important instrument or role of media is to frame things. To frame is to select some aspect of the perceived reality and make them more salient in the communicating text. In such a way as to promote a particular problem definition causal interpretation, moral evaluation, and/or treatment recommendation. So you don't only present the facts, you already give this as a kind of interpretation. One of the most frequently used frames, or these most frequently used frames in war times, is the first one: we are under attack. It's actually us, we are the victims. You always have to explain why we are suffering. So in media you only show your own victims, never show casualties of the other side. Second, good and bad scheme based on moral assumptions. There is only a good decision, everything else is bad. Nothing in the middle. You have to get these polarized decisions. And prolongation of this is a friend-pro construction, so it's us against the others. This only works actually, and you can only put up this frame if it's based on assumptions which are already there in the society. So it has to build on existing stereotypes, prejudices, pictures of an enemy. Every society has this. If you construct your own society, you say, this is us, you always say, kind of, what we are not. Through media coverage, you can work on this. You can make it more salient. You can add on it. You can give it some more characteristics and so on. You can play it, but it has to be somewhere already to use it. By this, you do a kind of homogenizing your nation. You create one single picture. You forget about all the differences and different ethnicities and so on. You're one nation. Quite often, you're creating an image of a special nation. So a nation of heroes, some historical superiority and so on. In the worst case, and actually it's more something for hate speech, but I put it on here because of the promulgation of this. In the worst case, you have a dehumanization of the enemy. As soon as the media is referring to your enemy only in terms of like, these beasts, these cockroaches, insects, whatever, it's a good indicator it's going to be worse, because it's a preparation that you don't see a human, but you can kill just a beast. So as you have this kind of indication in the media, if you see this, you know it's going to be worse, there will be blood. So one very important frame is creating a background, an historical, religious, mythical background. You have to embed your conflict into something larger. This protects them from being contested because it's very uploaded. So in Rwanda there was a fight against the long-standing suppression of an aristocratic class, the Tutsi. So this underdog against the smaller leading class. In Yugoslavia you had reference to genocide in World War II from one ethnicity on the other. Or the Battle of Kosovo. That's the last one. From the 14th century, the Serbs fought against the Ottoman Empire. So they made it a Christianity versus Muslim thing. Or take Ukraine. You don't get volunteers if you talk about the brotherly nation of Ukrainians. But if you talk about banderovцы, if you talk about fascists, then that, the whole background comes. There's everything there. There is Spasibo Dedo za Papier. There are the parades. There is all these films and movies. There's Auschwitz. There's everything. There's a huge background binding this conflict. And what keeps in your head is like you're fighting Nazi regime. So we kind of do what our grandfathers already did. Who can be against this? So if you manage to create this kind of frame, it's nearly impossible to break through this, to confront this kind of frame. Okay, next slide. Mobilizing. You have to use, if you want the people not only to agree that you're doing kind of war, but having to get engaged, you really have to play the emotional card. So emotional pictures and stories, like in Iraq, World War II, this thing about soldiers, Iraqi soldiers carrying out babies from incubators in Cuba. It was a lie, but it really helped keeping up, emotions. Or in Ukraine, next slide. This picture, you might have seen it. This picture, or the idea or the story about a crucified child. Both didn't prove to be true, but as soon as you put it on, you can't be sensitive or a kind of argumenting for people who are doing this. It's a very emotional, strong picture. Okay, next. And next. And you have to use emotional wording. So not neutral one. You don't talk about, your fighters. You talk about sufferers. You talk about martyrs, our heroes, brave men, defenders. Hate speech coming up, language of hate. You call your enemy, the enemy forces villains. mercenaries, hordes, barbarians, cutthroats, criminals, fascists, anything else but not the enemy forces. So, and next slide. I think there came a new quality in the recent Ukraine conflict. So there's the idea of hybrid model warfare, making media an asset, a weapon in this warfare. So media is not only oriented on their own people to gain the support, it's oriented on the enemy itself and on third parties who might support them. So it's oriented towards diminishing support on the enemy side or to the party supported possibly. And it's creating distrust in media itself. That's what we see right now, especially in the third parties, in Europe, and so on, through the international channel, Russia Today, RT, just RT. I think the second largest English-speaking news broadcast. They're presenting so many varieties of the reality that in the end you get completely lost. And by this, destroying the trust in media, knowing that media might be a very potential force to bind people together for more or against them. So if you want to see more on this aspect, I think there was a brilliant lecture of Timothy Snyder. You can see on YouTube. We might put this on the internet. Okay, conclusion. Next slide. One more citation from a German sociologist. In war times, the nature of public opinion becomes visible as a social force which dictates a certain way of thinking. Next slide. Media wartime is different regards effects on the audience. That's what I want to show in the beginning. And it's important because sometimes we use argumentations seeing the effect of media in war times to kind of control them in peacetime, which is not correct. And the other way around, you can't diminish the role of media, seeing that it doesn't work on you in peacetime. Second, persuasive communication is always set around existing frames, so it always reveals something about our society. It makes something you have to think about. Media in war times is often dealing with emotional content, which is actually not the best guidance if you decide to go on war or not. The best protection against persuasive communication is the plural media system. If you have one single media system you control, it's easy to get your message through. It's a plural political system. Autocracies are much more likely to engage in this kind of propaganda, and it's better and it's more effective. And of course, a high media literacy. Okay, last slide. Again, the citation from the beginning. As I mentioned, this was a liberal guy, actually. He agreed to, like a lot of liberal sociologists in this time, agreed to work in this propaganda. It's telling us that it's was extremely tempting for intellectuals in all times to be in the avant-garde for what they see in the just cause. But was always a test to our values. And you always have to reflect, is it worth engaging in this kind of manipulating people if you have the feeling it's a just cause? You always do most of the times see if it's a just cause afterwards. So think about it while you're already in charge. Okay, that's it. Thank you.